Good morning, Gillian, and welcome to IMD.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. Thinking about the business context for leaders today in this digital world, what do you see as the kind of main differences in the business context that leaders have to take account of?
Yeah, if I were to think about the changes that have happened in the last 5 years, I could sum them up as being, number one, because many of the leaders that are tasked with bringing across these transformations don't actually have the technical expertise to bring them forward, it's not so much about the expertise of the leader, but more about the network that they can create around them. So it's not about individual leadership, but more network-based leadership. Another change is transparency. So leaders don't have the choice anymore between what they keep private and what they share publicly. It's more about what the public wants to know about them and what their colleagues want to share about them than what they choose. So that's also a major change. And I would say the last major change that is prompting shifts in leadership is the virtual world. Is that we used to say a team was a group of people we met every day in our office, saw them face to face, and now many people see their team once or twice a year and the rest of the time working virtually, and that changes the context in which a person can lead.
You've done a lot of research into the implications for leadership, and you've developed the Agile leader model. So can you talk us through, what are the main elements of that model and what does it mean for leadership today?
So we've looked at, in a context of intense digital disruption, what are the leadership skills and traits and competencies that actually predict success in these environments. So we'll start with a model of 7 competencies, and that was the original model. And I'll start with my favorite because that's often the one that, at least for senior executives, they score the lowest on, which is humility. And this is openness to learning, openness to getting feedback from those at any level of the hierarchy. So sometimes people that are 3 or 4 levels below you. The second one is adaptability. So seeing that changing one's mind when new information becomes available is a strength and not a weakness. The next one is vision. So do you have a vision for the future? Maybe you don't know how to get there. You don't have a 3 to 5 year plan, but you know eventually where you want to go, and you're going to be adaptable in terms of how you get there. Engagement. Are you in listening mode? Are you more willing to listen to people around you than being the one who always is telling? Number 5 would be hyper-awareness. So being aware of the opportunities as well as the threats internally in one's organization as well as externally. Making decisions based on data would be number 6. So are you able to integrate data into decision making? It used to be the world of intuition. We would hire people based on experience because of intuition, but now data is becoming more important than ever. And then, as I mentioned, one of the changes in the world around leaders is pace. And so our 7th and final competency is speed of change and dealing with speed of change. So can you execute at speed? And then around these 7 core competencies, we have 4 what we call peripheral competencies. And these tend to be either outcome variables or predictor variables. So for example, it was nice for us to say, okay, humility is important, and humility is actually something that leaders struggle with. But what do people do to become more humble, right? Because we're in the job of developing leaders. So if we can't say what helps you to actually develop these competencies, then we're not very useful, right? So we started looking at the literature of what actually helps someone to be more humble, and we found that it's self-awareness. So if someone is aware and is cognizant of their strengths and their weaknesses, they're going to be more open to learning, especially on things that they're not so strong at. We also found that leaders that had really been put to the test, had been in situations where they failed, were also more self-aware of what they were not so strong at, and hence more humble. For adaptability, we found that the precursor to that was a personality trait called tolerance for ambiguity. So leaders that were more comfortable with uncertainty, with working with unknown variables, were more adaptable, were more able to change. And then when it comes to vision, as we study that variable more, yes, vision was still important. We found what was actually equally important, if not more, was can you persuade others and motivate others around that vision? So can you get other people to buy into the vision? And then lastly, in this last, what we call the 11th competency, this is related most to hyper-awareness as well as engagement, is the ability to build a network around you, and also a little bit about humility. What am I not so good at? What do I need to know, and what do I need to complete the tasks I have to complete And how do I build a network around myself to complete those tasks?
So you've described the framework surrounding the leadership in the digital age model. What sort of tools underpin that to help leaders assess their current capability and think about how they might develop those skills?
So I think one of the best ways to start with development is self-awareness. And so we've created a 360 in-house. And I think 360s are the most valuable because we have a lot of biases in terms of self-assessments, a lot of things we don't know about ourselves. And so we created a 360 which asks the leader to have managers, subordinates, peers, even ideally customers, fill out these measures about themselves. Very quick, takes about 20 minutes per rater, probably less, 15 minutes. And we find that it's very helpful for leaders to get some feedback about understanding, okay, here's my starting place. Where do I need to go from here? Also, what I've seen to be very effective in terms of developing humility and adaptability is some of these reverse mentoring programs or these shadow board programs where you ask senior leaders to learn from people that are much younger than them, that have a different point of view, that see the world in a very different way. And these are not only millennial shadow board or millennial reverse mentoring, but just any kind of minority group or group that's different from their own way of thinking can be very useful.
Can you share some top tips, particularly for those who are responsible for developing these sort of leadership capabilities within the organisation? So I'm thinking, leadership development practitioners. What should we be doing differently in our organisations in terms of how we invest in growing those leadership capabilities?
Well, what I find interesting is humans are inert, right? We like to stick with our comfort zone. We like to stay with things we know. So we can know we need to change, but actually putting the mechanisms in place and also the incentives in place is a much bigger challenge. And so I would challenge any HR executive or leadership development expert to really look at the leadership competency model that's rewarded in your organization and saying, how much does it overlap? How much does it touch on some of the competencies that we've found in our own research to be important? And I'm not only talking about the explicit competencies that you hang on your wall and you give at employee orientation to say this is important, but really, what do you actually reward in your KPIs? What do you promote? What kind of competencies do you promote on? And are those more about the old world competencies like perfection and telling more than listening and knowing more than being humble? And if so, really stepping back and saying, the modeling needs to come from the top. So in every program I've ever worked with, every client I've ever worked with, if this pressure or if this tone is not coming from the very top of the organization, this is where we need to change, and also being modeled by the CEO, by the C-suite, then normally the changes don't happen.
So Jennifer, any final thoughts, top tips that you'd like to leave our audience with?
I worry sometimes that as soon as we come up with a new leadership competency model, that leaders get very discouraged because they think, well, everything I've spent my career building is no longer relevant and is obsolete. And what I know is obsolete. And I would say that's absolutely not true. We like to say, and when I say we, I do a lot of this work with a fellow colleague, his name is Mike Wade. And what we like to say, it's more about a tension between the old world and the new world. And you can't forget the old world because, as I say, like for example, executing at speed is important, but yet there are times when you still need to be a perfectionist or thinking about perfection. Or humility, being open to learning is important now, but sometimes you still need to be the teller, the one with the knowledge. Or imagine something like using data to make decisions. There's still room in the world for intuition. So we say, don't forget everything you've learned, but then think to yourself, with these new competencies, how good am I doing on these? And am I able to be ambidextrous? Can I move between the old world and the new world? Because if we think about adaptability, that's really what's important.
Professor Jennifer Jordan, thank you very much.
My pleasure.